So it's come to my attention here that problem 8 on the homework is a bit of a tricky one. And that's because the data that's here is so long that there's so many different data points. One of your peers, let's see, I think it was Charlotte. Let me just double check. I want to give her credit. Mackenzie. Mackenzie had a great idea to use StatCrunch, which is essentially a stat calculating tool that's built right into MyStatLab. And so if you want to do that, click on the data set and then click on this little piece here that says to copy it. And here you're going to say open in StatCrunch. In StatCrunch here, then it'll open it. It kind of looks like an Excel file or like a Google Sheets file. And you can go through and calculate some summary statistics on this first variable. So if you go to stat and then summary stats and then go to columns, select the column you want to do, that's variable 1. So if we just select that, you can leave everything else the same and press compute. Then from there, it should spit out the things that you need. In particular, there's N, there's the sample size, 294. There's the mean, 750.92177, and the standard deviation you might also be interested in. And so you can use those to go through and calculate your thing. So if you're on a calculator, you can go into stat and then over to tests. This is a t-test. And then rather than being over here in data, right, you can just go to stats and enter in the information that's here. So the hypothesized value under the null, that was 649, just based on the wording of the problem. Your mean was given, it was the 750.92177. The standard deviation is 357.05862. My sample size was 294. And then depending on what tailed test you would do, you would either pick a two-tailed test or a right-tailed or a left-tailed test and go through and calculate. I'll just leave it as right-tailed for now. I don't know if that's right. But it will spit out your test statistic there, right? And it will spit out the p-value for you. So that's one way to do it. If you're an R user, let me just pull that up. So if you're an R user, a couple of different things. So one thing is you could take these summary statistics from StatCrunch and work them out just to work out your test statistic by hand. So remember, your test statistic is always your mean, so 750.92177. Subtract off your hypothesized value, which is 649, divided by the standard deviation, 357.05862, and then divided by the square root of 294, which is n. I'm just realizing my divide sign is wrong. But essentially that should give you the test statistic, the same test statistic that you would get here. There it is right here if you did it on the calculator. And then you can get your p-value by using p-norm, right? So remember, you do p-norm on, not p-norm, pt in this case, right? Because this is a t statistic. So you could use pt to work out the area. And again, pay attention to whether you want the left tail or the right tail or both tails, depending on what your alternative hypothesis looks like. The other longer winded answer is that you can go through and export the data and import in the data directly into R and have it do the calculations for you. That's one advantage of using R, is that it does this for us. So here, if you go to click on this, rather than open in StatCrunch or copy to clipboard, you can open it in Excel. So I'm going to save this in my downloads, and I'm just going to save it as Facebook data. Okay, so it's an Excel file that I'm going to save in my downloads as Facebook data. Okay, if I go into R, I can go through and import that in. So there's this import dataset button. So I'm going to say import dataset from Excel. I will note that the first time you use that import dataset button, it might tell you you need to install a package, or it might prompt you, and it's like 10 or 30 seconds to download this, but then eventually this should pop up. And then once you've installed it once, it's good to go. So browse to find your data file. Mine was saved in my downloads as Facebook data. So there I found it. Couple little modifications that we need to do. So you'll notice here that it's treating the first column here as, or the first like row here as like the header, which we don't want to do. So you can click first name as rows. If you uncheck that, it will then rename this as something else. And I personally like to rename it as something that makes sense. So I'm just going to call this friends. So I'm going to go over to column underscore names in the code. And rather than false, I'm going to change this to friends. Okay. Import. Okay. And so then you'll notice here, we can view the data here in this preview window. There's our Facebook data. There's the number of friends in this list. There's all 294 numbers. And you can see that it's here. Even if I close it out here, the data's there. It's Facebook data. Okay. Now to reference that data, you're going to have to use Facebook data $friends. Okay. So that's a list of all the numbers. So again, you can go through and work out the mean and the standard deviation that way. So Facebook friends, or no, Facebook data $friends. So you could do that to get the mean and the standard deviation, etc. Or you could also just take the data and plug it directly into t.test. So again, take the data name and then the other arguments that we have to add here. I always forget to add the mu argument. So that's our hypothesized value. So that would be 649. And then my confidence level, which would be 95%. I can't remember, but I'll put in 95% for now. And then the other thing that you may want to specify is the alternative hypothesis. So I'm going to do two-dot-sided. That may not be the appropriate one for this problem, but your options are two-dot-sided, greater than for a right-tailed test, or less for a left-tailed test. So if I press this, then it should go through. It works out my test statistic. That's the same one that I got before when I did it by hand, both in my calculator and in R. And it will work out the p-value. Just make sure that you've got the alternative correct here in order to get the correct p-value. So that's another way that you can do it in R. But either way, that should help you handle this huge amount of data that we haven't necessarily talked about. So I hope that video helps.